The International Broadcasting Trust was set up more than 20 years ago as a specialist independent production company, so the key goal at that point was to make programs about the developing world, the environment and human rights. Since then, we don't make so many programs now. We play a much more strategic role. We try and influence broadcasters in particular to make more programs and better programs about the developing world. I think if we look at this historically, NGOs and broadcasters have had a very bad relationship. And that's, both sides are to blame. Broadcasters, as we know, think they know best. There's an arrogance and an overconfidence, which can be good. It enables them to pull off projects that other people might be sceptical about. They're not by nature collaborative. They don't really like collaborating in a wholehearted way. And they're sceptical that NGOs have an agenda. And they don't want others to come and impose their agenda. So the broadcasters are sceptical. The NGOs are sceptical too, because they've seen so much bad television coverage. And they think that the broadcasters essentially don't trust the NGOs. So you've got a historically bad relationship. You're not going to solve that overnight. I think both sides need to meet and get to know each other. Comic relief is tricky. There's no doubt that comic relief has achieved a huge amount. And I know there's a debate within Comic Relief and within the BBC about how to move forward from essentially what has been extremely negative coverage. And for the most part it really is very negative, and I think that's a serious problem. That Comic Relief feels the need to bring in a huge sum of money because it knows how valuable that money is. And there's almost an equation. If someone on screen is tearful and has the most horrendous life story, that's when the phones start ringing and the checks and the credit cards are coming in. It's very hard for the Comic Relief team to resist going down that route. And there's a huge negative impact because Comic Relief is watched by a mass audience. And that mass audience does come away thinking that people in the developing world are all poor and destitute and hopeless. And that's a simplification that we're trying to move away from. I don't want to generalize, but it's certainly true that a lot of NGOs and people in NGOs had a very simplistic notion of video or television. It was there to talk about the issues that were their issues that they were concerned about, and they wanted it. They had a vision of the way in which video should tell stories, and it was essentially information, issues, education, and it was talking down to an audience, and the audience wasn't responding, understandably. Now I think things have shifted. And the changes in technology, but also the changes in thinking in NGOs, have meant that video can now be used so that people in the developing world can tell their own stories in their own words. And NGOs have understood the power of storytelling and the power of giving a voice to ordinary people, and for us in the West to be able to engage with those people and their stories and interact with them. So I think that's a hugely positive change, and I'd like to see a lot more of that. There are a number of successful examples of collaborations between filmmakers and NGOs. I recently saw some films made by Amref in Nairobi, and it was a fantastically exciting project where an independent filmmaker worked successfully with an NGO. Both sides agreed on what they were trying to achieve. There was training of young people, so young people were able to tell their own stories. The filmmaker could track that process in an interesting way, and I think what they ended up with was far more interesting than what you would have ended up with if the filmmaker had been on his own or the NGO had been in total creative control. I think there's a lot going on in new media that's very exciting, that gives filmmakers a chance to tell stories which wouldn't be told on mainstream television. One World TV is a great initiative, and others have followed in similar vein. Channel 4 in the UK has 4 docs. Other broadcasters in Northern Europe have similar initiatives. So I think independent filmmakers now can make short pieces that showcase their work and show that they have a different way of telling stories from mainstream television, and can get to the grassroots. And I think what's exciting about new media for me is I see it as bottom up, and I see old media as top down. So philosophically, I think new media is hugely liberating. I think it's very difficult to separate the junk from the really interesting material. On the other hand, I think creative chaos can be a good thing. If you imagine the opposite of everything being controlled and sanitized, that's got to be a bad thing. Maybe there's an interaction between the two, and somewhere they meet in the middle. It's going to be hugely stimulating. I think what's interesting is, if this chaos is so bad, why are the broadcasters so anxious to respond to it and to co-opt it and to present opportunities for all these chaotic filmmakers to put their material on mainstream television? I think we do live in exciting times. Broadcasting is changing, and I think a lot of those changes are for the good. And essentially it means that there's a far wider range of voices than there were before. That's good. There are much more opportunities for poor people, for all people in developing countries, in all countries, to tell their own stories in their own words, unmediated. I think that's hugely exciting. However, there's great competition, and there's no doubt that people want entertainment. So those of us who want to do serious things really have to be on our toes to make sure that the serious things we do are interesting and entertaining, because we know there's huge competition.